Every week, HR is expected to make expensive decisions with half the information and all the accountability, from benefits to workforce strategy. No pressure or anything. That's where Aon can step in and help. They help orgs across 120 countries cut through the noise with insights on health, retirement plans, total rewards, and AI, sharing data that gives leaders clarity instead of anxiety spirals. Aon exists to shape decisions for the better, so organizations can protect their people, grow their business, and stop pretending we'll figure it out later is a reliable strategy. Better data, better outcomes. That's Aon. This is Better Decisions, a special podcast series with Aon in partnership with I Hate It Here. I'm Hiba Youssef, and from February through May, we're dropping one episode a month focused on one thing, the decisions leaders keep getting wrong and what it actually looks like to make them better. Let me set the stage for today. Organizations have more data than ever before. Dashboards, engagement scores, productivity metrics, predictive analytics, you name it. Yet somehow the decisions we make about people still feel reactive, political, or even disconnected from what the data is actually telling us. This episode is about closing that gap. Today, I'm joined by Doug Melton, and we will dig into one big topic: why organizations struggle to turn people data into real decisions and where the breakdown usually happens. Doug, welcome to the pod.
Excited to be here. I love to talk about people.
Okay, well, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So, as background, by title, I head up our human capital analytics. And most recently, I've transitioned from leading human capital analytics to being our global commercial officer. So, in a nutshell, when I do introductions, what that basically means is I use data to understand people problems. And most of my career has been anchored around sort of three types of workforce problems. And that is, how do you make employees more healthy? And that's both physical health, mental health, as well as financial health. I know you recently had a financial fitness podcast series. The second one is around making sure you improve their performance and make them productive. And then the third area in which we've used analytics, again, helping global workforces, is around retention. So if you think about that concept, is like if I make sure they're physically, financially, emotionally healthy, and I got to invest in that as an employer, and then that should translate into a high performing employee or not. And then if I invest in those two buckets and I let them go work at the competitor across the street, then I've lost out on my ROI. And so we do a series of analytics that looks at what we call sort of whole person health to be able to help the workforce and whatever direction that a CPO or CHRO or CFO wants to take. So that's my background in a nutshell.
I love that. I don't know if they told you this, but I am like a data nerd. So I just have had this obsession with data. I worked at a business intelligence company ages ago, and my love of data really started then. But I feel like it's a way to connect like the anecdotal things I'm seeing with like real hard facts that then nobody can disagree with, right? Because there's nothing worse than HR being like, I think we have a problem, and then not being able to justify why you have that problem off of more than just like a gut feeling. So I am so excited to talk to you today. I'm going to geek out with you on a few things that we see across organizations. And where I want to start the conversation is around why organizations struggle to turn people data into decisions and where that breakdown actually happens.
Absolutely. Let's start there. And welcome to the Geek Club. I've got a white coat over there on my closet, and I've got a pocket protector I will overnight you as well. So
I can't wait.
yeah, yeah. So the great question is, organizations think about how do I actually take action on data? We typically like to deploy a framework to actually be able to do that, because some just get excited about the data, some get excited about the analytics, others get excited about this new insight that will be novel and compelling and will be able to answer a question they historically have been able to do. So our framework is really simple. Sort of step one is like, let's define what the business question is. Let's simply define what question that we're trying to answer. Normally, when you get a group of senior leaders around a room, you might think you're answering a simple question is like, hey, we want to make sure all of our new entries employees know what our mission statement is, because we feel like that can help them be better employees. So if you ask them, that's what we're actually trying to do. My guess is everybody will have a different answer to that question. So the first one is, what is the business question we're trying to answer? Then the second one is, what's the data that we think we need to be able to answer that question credibly? We will never have all the data that we need. We'll talk about that a little later to answer that question. But what do we think is the minimum viable data that we would need to have and how long we need to have that data as well. So it's not just data, but how long we need to have it. And then the third question is to actually make an action. So if you have the data, you have the question, you have the data, you run the analysis, you produce these insights. But one of the operative words you used was actionable insight. And that's
Mm.
where we kind of get stuck because it might be an insight, but it may not be actionable. And then the fourth and final part of this framework, four-step process is once you launch the action, you need to measure if it works. The number of companies that go through this very sort of front end process of defining that question, doing the analysis, putting this new workforce implementation plan in. And then I ask them when I see them 2 years later at a conference, by the way, how did that go? Did you improve the employees' health? Were people able to retire at the ideal age, et cetera? It's like, oh, I don't know, Doug. We put it in like the consultant told us to do. So on the back end, we have sort of continuous improvement, continuous learning as the fourth step of that process. That's how you make sure actionable analytics actually drives value and you can measure it on the back end.
Yeah, I've met so many people who don't do the measure it ongoing, where they're just like, I don't have time for that. We implemented it and we think it'll work. And I'm like, but if you don't check in every 6 months, every year, every quarter, whatever cadence you're on, how are you ever going to actually know that what you did is successful?
That's correct. That's correct. We call this building out a muscle. I mean, we're going to talk about it throughout this. It's like you want to build out this muscle of continuous learning. And oftentimes, again, that muscle that you need to do to continuous learning is not the data or technology, it's the behaviors and the patterns and the sort of process that you put in place for you and your division or for a full company.
Sometimes when I talk to HR leaders about being more data focused, I hear the response like, oh, but I'm like not technical. And I'm always like, "What do you mean?" Like, it's just data. Like, there's so many tools out there that can help you, like, people who can help you understand it. You don't I'm not saying you have to go code things or learn a different language. You are just looking at the data. And so I think one of the interesting things where I see people really struggle to turn, like, data into decisions is just this fear of actually understanding the data. And so, like, do you think that a lot of people struggle there, or do you think it's more about, like, making the decision from the data? You have to pick one.
Ooh, that's a hard one.
I know, and not to put you on the spot.
I would go with the latter. It's making the decision from the data because usually when you have to make that decision, I mean, this like take this out of artificial and go down to something very serious. One thing right now is the use of AI, right, and specifically AI within the workforce. So we are currently working with a large um, hotel and hospitality management company. And they're specifically looking at two types of their workforce: one, front desk greeters, and then two, individuals that work in the restaurants. And they're asking themselves, what part of the workflow do we want to actually put AI in so we can take that individual out, not replace them, but have them focus on higher value human points of input. And when we talk about those questions, the places where we're putting AI in there might be an area where it slows the process down. So the short order cook, for example, my average need 14 minutes to make a high quality steak. And if we put the AI in there, it might actually go up to 18%. So the steak is better, but it's only because there's other things that they're doing at the time, maybe preparing some other set of food, et cetera. Might be a bad example, but so what it is, it's hard sometimes to make the decisions because the actions you're going to take can adversely impact you, even if it benefits you in some other area part of the business, meaning you can actually make more food on an average basis. So that's a real example of how people are insight rich but actionable poor. In case those
Ooh.
actions actually drive something that leads to an adverse outcome.
That is sorry that I, like, gave my "ooh" 'cause that's, like, such a quotable moment, and it will be stuck in my head, insight rich, but decision poor. Because you're right, I thought the example was actually perfect. Because you might make the wrong with all those insights, you might make the wrong decision to take it longer to get the guy to make the steak, but, the steak might actually end up being better, so then you have to do these trade-offs, and I think a lot of ways we, like, struggle to make those trade-offs, but something that I think is super important is having agreement if you're thinking through all the outcomes and the trade offs that you might make. So, what are some ways you've seen leaders come to agreement on outcomes and how they're being measured?
Some of the ways that I've seen agreement on outcomes being measured has been on scenario playing. So we can actually talk about that. Like, what would we do if it was different? So, for example, and what I mean with scenario plating, meaning let's all get in a room and before we put 6, 9 months into a $700,000 engagement, let's actually just let's assess the outcome. So, as an example, there is a large IT company that we were working with that was dealing with a high set of mail based psychotic attacks, meaning they had no mental health provider and they were for having a mental breakdown. And so we all kept saying to ourselves, well, if we give them a virtual health benefit, what would that do? If we gave them one extra PTO day so they have more time for wellness, what would that look like? We kind of went through all these scenarios and we said, look, before we go through the analysis, let's do it. What if we actually came back and said, every single high tech software engineer, male or female, we have to think about equity here, of course, we're able to get 10 more PTO days a year. And if we did that, the data science tells us that the number of people getting admitted to the hospital for mental health disorder goes down 15%. I'm making this up. Well, that's great if it goes down 50%, but if we do for 5 days, it doesn't do 15%, it only goes down 7%. So then you have to sit here and say to ourselves, all right, if this was our conclusion, and we know we would get lower emissions from mental breakdowns if we actually gave them more PTO days, but that then increase our cost, right? Our overall cost for the employee, because now we're paying them 10 times a year to not work, but to take care of themselves. What's the ROI on that? And so if we do that scenario plan and you're saying, look, Doug, I don't care if your study said we can give them 2 more days. I can't afford it. So I can't entertain 5 or 10 days. Then we stop and we go back to like, okay, well, then let's rethink, is this the problem we want to focus on or is there a different problem? So I find that sort of creating those mock scenarios and putting the best case, worst case in there and seeing in that boardroom what decisions are they going to make oftentimes will inform whether or not even goes down the path of leading to an empirically based business decision.
Yeah, because like, imagine you didn't get that agreement at first, and then you got to an outcome, and everyone was like, "Wait a minute, we can't afford this." And then you're in like a conversation where you have to pull everything back. I worked with a CEO once who talked about things as like a two-way door or a one-way door. It's like a two-way door, you can walk back the decision. A one-way door, you walk through, you can never go back. And so when I'm trying to get alignment on even business stuff that I'm working on, I'm always thinking with that thought in mind, like, is this something we could walk back or not? And then try to get closer to that alignment so we're not in a situation where we make a decision, we get to the very end, and then someone raises their hand and goes, wait a minute, how did we even get here? Or my CFO says, wait, that's going to actually cost us way more than we forecasted. We can't do that. So I love the scenario planning as an effort to get everyone on board and on the same page. And it could possibly also bring up ideas and outcomes you didn't even think were possible. But from like the group being together and strategizing, you come up with something new.
If you notice the first two things that we've talked about so far today, in question number one, step one was define the business question. In this last question, our first action would be let's do some scenario playing. In neither one of those cases did we talk about actually advanced analytics, predictive modeling, generative AI. We never said any of those words, just to really underscore that the first couple steps in each of these process, it really has nothing to do with a PhD in biostats. That's not what this is. It's about asking the right question.
Okay, so we've touched on a few different things, but we haven't actually gone deep in like the data piece of it yet. So, what's the difference between collecting more data versus making better decisions with the data you already have?
I thought a lot about this. This is one of the most misunderstood tension in analytics. You know, people often equate better decisions with having more data when in reality they're sort of two different things. I've seen it play out where people want to become data junkies and have all the data before they make a decision. And then we talk about folks that feel responsible for not necessarily balancing the data, but having the database result, which is the science, with the art of this, saying like, hey, that's good, but I don't think we need all of it because there's an art component to it as well. That's outside of the data. To give this like a very real example to your question, um, with making decisions with the best data you have at the moment being my preferred recommendation. I originally started my career by the bedside, not in employee benefits. And by being at the bedside, specifically working in EDs, when an individual comes in reporting a chest pain, at that time, you could go back and look at their Apple Watch results from when they ran 3 weeks ago. You can go back and see sort of were they eating healthy during the holidays that we just can't pass from month to month. But at the reality, when you're in the ED and a person's reporting chest pain, you have to make the best information with that data you have available right there in the moment. So at a minimum, you're going to take a blood panel, and that blood panel is going to tell you whether or not their insulin level is too up, too down. It's going to tell you whether or not what their white count cell is. It's going to tell you what the current blood pressure level is, et cetera. And these are all in the data elements that we can use in the moment. Again, I would love to be able to see their last MRI or CT scan. I'd love to be able to see how many hours they got to sleep. I'd love to be able to see what their BMI was 3, 6, 9 months ago. But at that time in the ED, I've got a very limited set of data to make a critical decision about the future of someone's life. And so that's an example where you're not going to be data rich and you got to make the best decision with this little bit of information as possible. I've seen the inverse of this where we are trying to make decisions with things like gene cell therapy, just staying in medicine, for example. And historically, in medical drug trials, you might go 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you sort of get that FDA approval. With gene cell therapies, right? The sample sizes are tiny, and we're looking at 6, 7, 8 months of data. So you go from a world in the pharmaceutical space, right? Some of the most prevailing therapies out there to manage chronic conditions have longitudinal records of hundreds of thousands of individuals, and that is a correct data-rich situation to make decisions for the FDA. But now, because we are now and looking at things such
Yeah.
as gene and cell transplants, that puts us in a situation where we're going to have to act on limited data. Neither one are both bad. It's just the contextual relevance of what's the decision you have to make at the time which you have data available. So hopefully those examples make it real.
I love that. Also, I'm just fascinated by you. Like the connection of like health to what you're currently doing is so interesting to me. Like it I often use the reference that HR feels like the doctor of an organization at times. Like we're always trying to figure out what are these symptoms, what are the root causes of these symptoms, how do I treat them? And so I always joke that like I like to put my doctor hat on for every problem because it's not just this one isolated thing. Usually everything is connected. And that's where understanding too, like what data you've collected versus what you want to collect in the future can also really help you as you're the doctor of an organization, not diminishing doctors who go to a lot of school to do their job. But I do think like sometimes it feels like we're the doctor of an organization. And I've definitely fallen into the trap where I'm like, oh, I need more data before I can make this decision. And now I'm gonna start thinking to myself, okay, with my limited data, like could I make a better decision or do I even need anything more? If making people decisions lately feels like a guessing game with expensive consequences, welcome to everyone's nightmare. Aon helps organizations make better decisions about people, risk, and everything in between using actual data, not vibes, not gut feelings, real data. They call it the business of better decisions for a reason. It's time HR had better tools to work with. A big thing this brings up, and something I've written about a lot in the newsletter lately, is this idea of judgment. Because as we're looking at how AI is going to potentially reshape work and transform how all of us make decisions, the thing that it can't necessarily do for you is judgment. It can tell you, right, like this is a good idea or a bad idea, but you yourself have to have human judgment. So, what does good judgment look like when potentially the analytics actually conflict with leadership intuition
Oh,
or the business pressure,
so
right?
yep. Hey, right. Yeah, yep. This is again, this is where the art meets
This
the
is
science.
life. Yeah.
Well, art meets science plus opinions, prior experiences. So leaders have these opinions. They have prior experiences that shape their intuition. There's unspoken incentives. There are constraints in the room that some know about and others don't know. And so, what the right path look like is always not clear. But I would
Mm,
say in these moments, good judgment is not about pushing harder on the data or trying to win the argument analytically. That's not it. It's recognizing that analytics doesn't operate in a vacuum. It sort of operates within sort of these human systems. So no affiliation at all. No commercial affiliation at all. Um, there's a book out called Competing on Analytics. And Competing on Analytics, The New Science of Winning. It's by Tom Davenport. And one of the things he has in there is he calls it the analytic maturity pyramid. And this is, again, competing on analytics really in corporate America and for large employers. And if you look at that pyramid, the bottom of the pyramid, which is essentially the most immature, all it is like, yeah, we think we should get into data, but we've all been doing this for 35, 40 years. Our CEO's got 28 years of experience in this. So if he says something, and the financials are kind of directly there, we're going to move forward. Then if you go up the analytic maturity, all of a sudden in row two, you actually start to say, yeah, you know what? We need a structured data governance and a data lake. We need to move and actually acquire an analytics team. Okay. So that's kind of the layers 2 and 3. And when you get to the top of the pyramid, 4 or 5, um, fundamentally it says your organization, is the DNA of your organization is are actually making fact-based decisions with sound judgment. So it's not saying just analytics or just sound judgment. It's saying you're able to do them together, and it's an integral part of what you're able to do. And that's where you actually are able to get to this. The business pressure is less because you all are sort of working with the analytic mature mind, and you're doing it in the context of you made decisions before in the past and you can learn from it. So I guess to answer your question, it's that pyramid that kind of shows where an organization can get to so that you're balancing sound judgment and reason with empirical set of facts, right? And very often you get an organization getting both theirs. By the way, the top of that pyramid, the opinions and the prior experiences and others become less of a role than someone's point of view.
Yeah, that's it's so hard sometimes with to balance the like leadership intuition piece, especially when you have people who potentially have done the job for like 20 plus years, 30 plus years, 40 plus years. Like they think they've seen it all and they've seen quite a bit. I don't want to diminish that experience, but it is really hard when you're up against that and you are trying to advocate for something from an HR perspective that is like directly in conflict with how the person sees the situation. So I love that you're talking about that pyramid and how to get through that because it's been one of my toughest challenges, candidly, as we're like dealing with executives who have a very strong point of view on something. And it's almost like sometimes I have to bring the data to even get them to start thinking outside of their regular thought bubble. It's been so interesting to see that happen in real time.
The one example I'll give you is very common would be you ask an organization, what does it take to retain their top employees? And
Mm,
most of them immediately say pay or employees, retain their
hey,
employees. I
hey,
mean, said
yeah.
they said they jumped to pay. There was a 2024 Gallup poll that came out that said when you looked at the top three reasons in 2024 an individual left an organization, number one was I saw 37% of them said I saw no pathway to career advancement. I just didn't see like what's my next role, what's my role after that. That's what 37% of them said. 31% of them said I don't believe in the culture. My manager is toxic.
Mm.
They're making us go back into the office, whatever that may be. And then 16% said it's because of pay. So again, this is a question of judgment. And, most CFOs say, well, look, CHRO, everything would be okay if you're able to double the salary of everyone. I bet our attrition rate would go down significantly. And actually, that's not the case. There's other two elements play much more of a factor than just pay alone.
Yeah, I love that example because every day it feels like we're battling an assumption in HR. And so, like, my feeling of dealing with that, a lot of HR leaders tell me, like, I feel like my judgment isn't trusted, or I'm the business leader that gets the most amount of questions about why I want to do something. And like frankly, I have seen that. I've seen marketing sometimes gets to run an initiative that I would have had to have like jumped through hoops to even get my people program to the place where it wanted to be to do that. And I mean, I think it's because everything impacts the employees. And at the end of the day, like we can't grow our business without also, our employees being effective at their job. But it is such an interesting predicament so many of us find ourselves in where we are just battling to get the authority we deserve. And for so long, people have said, like, HR needs to earn its seat at the table. And I have said, I hate that statement. I'm like, earn my seat. Like, my seat should be cemented. If the most important thing driving the business forward is the people, don't you think, like, I should always have a seat there? And, like, my expertise should also be respected in the same way it is for everybody
Yes.
else. But
Yes.
it's like the wildest thing when someone says HR needs to earn its seat at the table. I cringe every time because I'm like, no, no, we are potentially one of the most important functions, especially in the day and age of AI where workforces are transforming and the world is changing so rapidly. Like, who do you think is going to minimize the amount of chaos at your organization other than an HR leader? And so, like, I always say, like, data, when you're at the table, it's there, you're supposed to be there, but like data can be the thing that takes you from, I have an assumption to, I have an assumption and I know this is how it'll play out. Here you go, I have the data. So I think like balancing the two of we also should have the right to have our assumptions, but bring our data to the table to make sure that we are also respected for our opinions and viewpoints. Um, one question I've been asking every single guest this special series is what is one analytics driven decision companies keep getting wrong? And what would a better business decision look like? I know.
Uh,
I've been asking you a lot of loaded questions today.
oh yeah, yeah,
I've
yeah.
been giving you like I've been like, I'm going to go in.
Uh, Thinking about taking this vest off. Honestly, it's getting kind of warm here. But this, like,
Doug's getting grilled. That can be the title of the episode.
We can do that. We can do that. Let's maybe let's time box it. I'd say in the I mean, there's the one question that, and maybe I'm time boxing it because the last 6 years has felt a lot longer than what maybe like dog years because of everything we've gone through.
Yeah.
So I would say in the last 6 years, at the root of it, where we've seen companies keep getting it wrong is decisions around what makes I make sure I get the optimal employee performance. The outcome again is what set of situations do I need to provide in order to get the optimal performance of my workforce. That's the one I keep getting consistently wrong. So first, when COVID kind of first happened in 2020, it was the great debate about working from home or not working from home. Then we came out of that, and it was a great debate about the Great Recession. And then again, it was
Mhm.
around questions around, well, it depends. I care about maybe I'm less concerned about a Great Recession if my best employees are the ones that are leaving, and not the ones that are leaving. Then we kind of came out of that, and you start to see things like, oh, the advent of AI, how does that play a role? Last year, a big push on the use of GLP. We think GLP not only improves health, but improves employee performance. And so there are more questions around performance and medical cost trend. And then this year, sort of front and center for us, sort of taking a page out of North America, thinking about Europe, pay equity and pay transparency, again, in the context of, okay, if I get to these levels of equity across gender with pay, does that equate to better performance? So the one theme that we keep getting and we're answering with different lens and slices, and we're not always getting it right. Some are, I'm not saying it's all, universally, is around what are the right decisions around maximizing employee performance. And so one of the tools that we've been able to sort of, or not even the tools, approaches that we've been able to use is look at total rewards optimization through the lens of performance. Okay. And really very simply what that does is it says, okay, look at your top performing employees and put them on the board. And then take your lower performing employees and put them on the board as well. And then we're going to go back to sort of the 80s in which you had a dial. If your dad was playing his records downstairs, you have a dial that you could
Or
go
me.
sort of up and down on also the bass, et cetera, or the treble. We're going to do that instead of it being basic, treble, et cetera. We're going to call it uh, uh, increase in salary. We're going to call it increase or decrease in PTO. Are we gonna make the health benefit richer or lesser, lower deductible or increase it? Is the pharmacy benefit get lower deductible? We put all these things on the left side of the page: PTO days, pet insurance, you name it, we put that on the dial. And as you start to change the dial, you'll see if higher performing employees, for example, we notice if there's a equity incentive associated with their role, they're more
Mm.
likely to stay. But if you look at some of the lower performing employees, equity incentives are less attractive. What's more attractive to them are very rich benefits and a lot of benefits that support family planning, such as IVF or such as dependent caregiving. As an example, some of the lower performing employees would prefer that over equity and incentives. And so I'm getting back to you. What do you keep seeing companies getting wrong? Most of the time, companies get that wrong because there is no universal decision for how to get to employee performance. There is no universal single decision on how do you optimize employee performance. And so it has to start to become a very consumer centric approach. But it's fiscally hard for clients to do that because then you could adversely be giving people different benefits, which might put you at sort of a legal risk. But then vice versa, even if you wanted to give differentiated benefits based on employee performance, that's going to be an overly sized amount of investment you'll have to do in order to make the benefit lower. All right, as well as make the equity incentives for your high performing employees. And so that one is the one we keep getting wrong. And I think the biggest reason why it's getting wrong is actually not the fancy analytics I just described. It's because of the inability to measure some of those stats I gave you earlier about the
Mm.
Gallup poll. Whether if it's a toxic manager, if that's not self-reported, you won't see it. If that is no career path, I might be intrinsically not motivated to do it. So it has nothing to do with pay. It's just I'm not intrinsically motivated. You don't know if Doug has been a self-quitter at work unless you're documenting that in some database and he's providing self-reported data for you. So I think the answer to why measuring employee performance is typically wrong is you need to be able to, that answer is not universal, so it changes for every employee. And then B, in order to answer with precision, you need to move away from the quantitative data and then add some of the qualitative perception data in order to get sort of a universal answer around that. So that's why it's so hard to answer that performance question.
I know. Ugh, I'm sorry I asked it, but that all you just gave us so much good food for thought, though, as we are thinking about performance and measuring and making better decisions around that. It's something I think about a lot. Where like in this age of personalization, I've given this reference so many times, but like you open Netflix and Netflix tells you like the next 5 movies you should watch, and every time, without fail, I'm like delighted that it picks movies that I would watch, and I'm like, oh my god, obviously it picks movies that I would watch because it knows I'm the one watching it. And so I think about that too as we talk about how do we make better decisions around like benefits, well-being, all of that stuff, because we are such in this age of personalization that like what looks like it might drive a better outcome for me might be something that actually doesn't drive a better outcome for you. So as we're thinking about these better decisions in the future, how do we account for the fact that like different people want different things? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to add a follow on question to my big through line question, but I'm so curious because you were talking about that dial, and maybe the dial is 10 on one thing, 12 on another for me. And for you, it's 50 on one thing and then 5 on this thing. So, how do we accommodate for that in the world of like personalization?
Well, let's connect to one of your other questions. It's about sort of judgment. So, do we think that it's best for our company's performance, particularly around growth, for us to take the discretionary cash we have and put it towards those elements of the dial that makes our top employees want to stay, and therefore
Mm,
we divest in the other parts of the dial and bring those down for where we may not want employees to stay, and therefore the benefits not attractive. So that's how you get there. I mean, it's the uncomfortable conversation. There's only so many for every $1 I invest. Where do I get the greatest benefit? That's the macro question. And unfortunately, that not all employees will equally benefit from that $1 invested.
yeah,
But
that's a good
these are
point.
businesses we're talking about, and I think
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think it depends on like your employee population. Like our employee population at Work Week is like relatively young and healthy. And I think the benefits they want are quite different from maybe like an older or aging population. But it's brought up some like interesting conversations around what do they want. Like we haven't had a single employee ask about pet insurance. We give like a bunch of other benefits like a book stipend, 401k match, like financial well-being, that type of benefit. We have not had a single person ask about pet insurance. And so it's just interesting to think about in this era of personalization. How do you kind of actually meet the moment where it's at and the employees where it's at? And I love that you connected it to the business. Like, unfortunately or fortunately, you should know what your top performers want because that could move the dial on performance as a company as a whole. And that might be a hard thing to hear, especially as when we bring up topics around like equity, like you said, you want to make sure that there's equity, but at a certain point, like you have to make the decision on what is going to help push the business forward. It's definitely complicated. Like none of this is easy work. And I feel like it requires so much nuance and judgment. So thankfully, I think HR will maybe always have a job. There's this joke on the internet where it's like AI will replace HR. And every time I laugh because I'm like, I would like to see it try. Like it could have this job. We'll see what happens. So I mean, no, but coming back to that judgment piece, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. I took a bunch of notes on that framework you mentioned, and this was really helpful as I'm thinking through, even for my own personal benefit, what kind of decisions we're making at my org and how are we aligning on outcomes and what's best for the business. So, Doug, thank you for today and sharing your expertise.
Like I said, it's been great spending some time with you today. And like I said, that pocket protector is on its way to your home.
I can't wait. Thank you.